So welcome everyone. I know that it's getting harder and harder to fit these online conversations into the day. Everyone's just getting really busy. Not everyone's working from home, and Fridays, kind of like the day when you're just trying to cram everything in. So I really appreciate you being here and taking the time to do this. So I was reading an article last night, which I think was quite an old article now, really, but it said, get a comfortable chair, permanent work from home is coming. Well, it's kind of already here, I think. And I know that many still are working from home. Some are beginning to return to the office. Many companies are actually embracing this as well. And I know we're going to talk about that and how it kind of pans out in some businesses. I mean, Google and Twitter are already kind of making this a permanent thing. So employees have a choice whether they work from home or not. Let's face it, like office space is really expensive. So business leaders are really looking at that as a cost-cutting exercise. And then of course, the benefits to the employees is that they don't have to spend their money commuting or their time commuting. And I'm also seeing a trend of people kind of moving out of cities altogether, whether to get, closer to nature or just simply not living in small kind of city apartments. And I know that Doug from the Retail Profit in one of the webinars that we had was talking about how all of this is actually reshaping our cities and how we work and how we commute into work and so on. So I think that's an interesting element, but that's probably for another conversation. So the global pandemic has really forced us to stay at home and rethink the way that we work. And it has shown us that we can work effectively. Many of us, including myself, have actually been doing that for quite some time. So welcome to the club. The biggest lesson in all of this is that we can actually trust most people to do their work from home. And I think that's an element that I really want to explore today, as that's a really big topic. And of course, not everyone has the best conditions to do that. Some people are living in flat shares, and as Thomas was saying in his article, not everyone has a closed door where they can just shut down everything and focus on what they need to do. But employees are asking to spend more time at home, whether it's not having to commute, whether having more flexibility. So not everyone wants to return to the office just yet. So I don't actually believe that we will be working from home forever. The biggest drawback I actually see is kind of that loss of, those spontaneous kind of interactions that you will have over a water cooler, for example, or, having a coffee with a friend that you just kind of spontaneously bumped into. And that sense of community and, belonging that a shared space can really cultivate. I know not all offices really do that, but I think the successful ones do. It can feel kind of isolating without a physical presence of your colleagues, especially when you don't have kind of tools or processes to really help with, fostering collaboration and kind of, bringing ideas together. So I do think that going forward, it's going to be a mixture. And again, that's something that I'd like to ask the panelists what they think about that. So today, I want to explore how this global social experiment is affecting the way that we work and its impact on relationships, collaborations, trust, leadership, productivity, all of those things. And also how technology can act as an enabler for a better remote experience, like, for example, the one that we're having right now. So I'd like to welcome our three amazing speakers. So we've got Thomas Bouquet, who is the Chief People Officer and CSR at Petit Bateau. We've known each other for some time, actually, and a little while ago, in fact, a few years ago now, we did an event together bringing fashion tech entrepreneurs and investors together and talking about kind of innovation there. And you were also a client at Ralph Lauren and now doing amazing things at Petit Bateau. Then we have Dr. Brennan Jacoby, who is the founder of Philosophy at Work. He's a philosopher, he specializes in trust. And we actually met through the School of Life, where you used to run amazing courses, and recently have written a report called The Virtues of Virtual, which is really exploring how the C-suite leaders can empower their people when working remotely. So this is super relevant to what we're going to be talking about today, and I'd like to touch on that. And then we've got Ben Gould, who is the Global Strategic Partnerships Manager at Workplace from Facebook. And he heads up the Connected Executive Program, which is helping CEOs to create sort of a more connected workplace and helps to, in some ways, humanize tech. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Maria Vorostovsky. I'm the founder and CEO of HVO Search. And we're an executive search firm working with kind of lifestyle, beauty, sports, luxury, and fashion industries. We tend to work on kind of head of level and above internationally. And I'm also working on a project which is looking at kind of helping to match talent with opportunities, but I can't share too much just yet, but watch this space. So let's get straight into it. What I wanted to do actually is to talk to each person individually, so it's a little bit of a new format, and then I have some group questions that I wanted to ask, and then the last 20 minutes I want to bring in the audience and make sure that we talk about that. So I think we're right on time, maybe even 1 minute ahead. So Thomas, I'd like to start with you. And my question is, how has leadership in your business adapted to remote working?
It came very, all of a sudden. So we had to adapt very quickly. And in fact, it took us a week or so to find our feet, so to speak. But in fact, I think that the most important thing was to set up new rituals, new routines, and intensify communication. I think the two things were the most important. Instead of having a board meeting on a weekly basis or every other week, we had a quicker one, shorter one on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. From a crisis management situation, we went to a little bit more steadier path, but it was really the point. And this acceleration, this intensification of communication has been at every level. We have the internal communication, all the newsletter and so on. From a monthly rhythm, we went to a weekly rhythm. So that was really the point.
Mm. So it's interesting that you're saying that you actually started to make things shorter. And I think, we all can relate to having, extremely long meetings that, kind of go on for ages. Do you think that made it, was it to do with the fact that it was remote, or was it to do with the fact that it was, as you said, crisis management?
Well, definitely. I mean, of course, the urgency of doing things and the feeling that we had no time to deliberate, certainly no opportunity to, no luxury to waste time did play a role. But the amazing thing, and my company was really not good at managing meeting, taking decision, etc. And I do believe that the distance working had played a very positive role. A not so insignificant element of it is that we started on time. Mm-hmm. Only the right people were around the room, and we've been able to, a meeting were focused and shorter. And I think that part of the thing that we try to keep now that we are out of the lockdown, this sense of getting to the point. So it's not suited for everything, definitely, but for taking decision and I would say the run side of the business, it has been very precious.
Mm. And have you seen an impact on productivity as a result of these, having to work remotely?
Broadly speaking, yes. We don't measure it per se, but as I said, we've been super efficient and we've done things, but it partly was the crisis aspect, but we've done things that would have taken weeks or months to do. Take one example, for instance, We manage, part of Petit Bateau is obviously to manufacture clothing, and we've been able to produce masks, personal protection equipment in a matter of 48 hours, when to develop a simple product like that could have taken weeks. But that, again, I think it's more the crisis than the home working.
But I suppose the crisis has forced us to do things in a different way. And I think this is the consistent message that I'm seeing, whether it's, producing masks, or whether it's implementing, digital, or like launching, a new initiative. And actually you can achieve quite a lot when you're super focused and you have, you kind of almost like don't think about anything else and just do that one thing, which is going to make a massive impact. So you can make change very quickly.
I think one of the key challenges that we face today is to keep the best of those experiments and really to learn from experience, and all what we are going to discuss about quality of management, trust, delegation, that's the same. I mean, now we are entering a new phase, but we have to make sure, and we focus a lot of energy on that to make sure that we keep the best. Now that the urgency is over. I mean, it might come back, but broadly speaking, it's over.
And how is your business planning to return to the office now? Have you come back already, or is it a mixture?
No, first of all, we never stopped the warehouse, and very quickly we came back on the factory side. So the feeling was that we never fully stopped. That said, at some point end of April, all of our stores around the world, direct or partners, were closed, which was a very strange feeling, but the e-commerce never stopped. When it comes to the office, we are back since beginning of June, but in a situation that, first of all, we have some constraints, and in fact, they are good constraints because it forces us to experiment with an hybrid, what I call the hybrid way of working, and we try to mix home working and office working, and with some flexibility across the week, and flexibility in we had traditional offices, a mix of open plan and closed office, but where everyone has his working station, so to speak, and the external constraint have forced us to experiment with a much more flexible way of using the building. And in fact, I really hope that the government constraints are going to last a little bit longer, so that people can really learn and get used to this hybrid way of working, because they have no choice. So it's easier. That said, once we have a framework, but within the framework, we give a lot of space to experiment, and very clearly we said to the staff, to the people, we really don't know how it's going to work, so let's try, and we'll make mistakes, we'll find new ways, and some are very practical in terms of we don't have we are in historical buildings in Paris and at the factory, so we are absolutely not equipped in terms of state-of-the-art reservations, booking tools, etc. So we had to experiment with all that. We've developed a new outlook to manage flexibility. It's great, and people love it. And so to end up answering directly your question, is that about half of the people are at the office on any given day of the week, but never the same.
No, for sure. I mean, I think, what I like what you're saying about, like, this is an experiment and let's try. And I think this is where, we always talk about in these webinars about this kind of idea of innovation, when you don't have an alternative and you just have to think of different ways of doing that. Mm-hmm. In your article, which is really great, by the way, and everyone should read it, but there's one thing that you've mentioned, how the chief people officer now needs to be a chief party officer. And I really liked that. I thought it was, funny, and actually it made a lot of sense. I mean, what else do you think is the role, what did you mean by that? And what else should a chief people officer, do?
What I meant is really to try to think about what is the purpose of having, brick and mortar offices today. And when you think about it, it's and you also need to think in answering the question of why should I come to the office today? Mm-hmm. And we need to provide ourselves, our teams, good reason to come to the office and to endure the commute and to do, they could have been running or sleeping or enjoying the family instead of being in the tube. So very strong challenge in a way. So giving people reason to be in the office is to meet each other in a meaningful way, to do things that they cannot do by working at, from home, let's basically say from home or through digital contact, and the social bond is one, very obviously. So, it was half joking, but the party notion, all this creating a community. But I would like to mention for the other thing is learning. And I do believe that the more we are going to work in a fragmented way, the more learning can be an opportunity, learning together, learning from each other, can be an opportunity to bring people together. And it's nothing new. When the big company became global, say GE or L'Oréal at the times, one of the first things that they did, I'm speaking of the 90s, is to build a management development center or corporate university from, with a physical place where people around the world could gather. And in fact, at a lower scale, this is exactly what we need to do.
No, I think, this idea of kind of giving a reason for people to be there, I think that is, just questioning what's the purpose of the office. I'd like to come back to that later, because I'd like to move on to Brennan, and actually, just touching on this idea of, the relationships. Obviously that's, a key part of what we kind of go into the office for. And Brennan, as you did your PhD on trust and organizational kind of contexts, what top tips can you give your clients who want to cultivate this kind of cultures that are climates where trust can really thrive?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question at this time, specifically, Maria, because a lot of times, there's been a lot of articles on social media and everywhere else around about talking about how do we build trust in the virtual context, or how do we manage relationships and do teams when they're dispersed. And I think the first thing to flag is that I think our context is what shifts when we go dispersed, remote, virtual, whatever you want to call it. But the nature of trust and the nature of ourselves as humans doesn't change. And at the end of the day, our organizations are made up of people and, and layered with culture and all kinds of beautiful things. But a lot of it is human, and a lot of it is human relationships. And so something that's already been mentioned today is, how do we make the tech more human? How do we make the policies and the approaches more human? And I think that's really important to hold on to. But at the core, when we're thinking about trust and managing it well in the virtual context, trust itself doesn't change. So when I work with businesses on how they manage relationships, we always start by saying, well, how do you think about trust? And sometimes I'll even get them to sort of start by drawing trust. And my only sort of stipulation is that they're not allowed to draw any pictures of people. They have to try to draw down just using shapes and things, because I'm trying to get them to say, how does our business think about relationships? What are our assumptions about trust? And so the first thing to say is we need to think about how trust is, what trust is and how it works. And the point that I would say, a bit of an answer there, is that I think whenever we're trying to manage trust, we're trying to create climates or spaces, whatever word you want to use, at work, where people feel safe about being imperfect, about not getting everything right. We want people to have the right answers, to do great jobs and all that stuff. But actually we know, all the research suggests that when people have greater psychological safety, when they feel that they are expected to get things right, but if they don't, It's not going to be aimed at them as a sort of personal mark of shame. I think then all the research shows that we actually do better work. We have greater engagement, and there's a lot better sort of mental health, well-being at work and everything as well. So if trust is about creating spaces, if climates and cultures of trust is about creating spaces where people feel that it's safe to be imperfect, then I think the next thing, and specifically for execs and everyone to be thinking about, is how do we do that? How do we help people to know that it's okay to be imperfect? Because at the end of the day, we all are.
Here, because there's, what Thomas just earlier also talks about, kind of trying things, and it's okay, we make mistakes. With the pandemic and with people having to like go, and having to work from home and actually do things that they haven't really done before, being asked to do things that maybe they were not used to before, maybe going beyond doing what they, their jobs. Do you think this actually, I'm kind of being, it's a leading question, but like, do you think that the pandemic has had an impact on that? And, is it positive, is it negative? And what have you seen in your clients?
Yeah. So I think if it was just me sitting in my office thinking about it, that I would probably bet that it had a positive impact, that, we're all in this together, we like to say, and we're all sort of, everyone's going through a big change curve. And so you would expect that because we're all going through that, we're sort of all on the same vulnerability sort of spectrum. And, at these days, if one of my sons walks in the room and wants to climb up on my lap or something, my sons are toddlers, so that could happen. If that happened today, then a lot of people sort of watching this might go, yeah, that's fine, that happens to me, we expect that these days. Whereas a couple months ago, at the end of last year, that might have felt much more embarrassing. I remember when that happened on the one of the sort of famous couple years ago interviews on the BBC, right? You had the correspondent Rachel come in, and it made big news. Whereas now that's just happening every day. So I think on the one hand, if it was just me, I would say that's probably had a positive impact. At the same time, because I'm working with a lot of different industries, from sort of legal to media and music production and athletics, I have to say that I think the cultures of industries are to some extent overriding. So for example, in the financial services sector, where there's a lot, there's pressure everywhere, but at least there, we like to talk about all the pressure, and we're very aware of it, where there's a lot of pressure to get things right. And even if there aren't sort of lives on the line, it feels like there is. In those situations, I've seen my clients not necessarily going, oh, we suddenly can be a bit more startup culture-y because the pressure's off, because everyone's, we can't get things perfect. Instead, now there's all the more pressure because they still have this culture where you have to get everything right. And now there's so many more curveballs thrown at them. So I think it's, the context again has shifted, but the culture is consistent. And I think to come back to trust, what we can do as leaders is all the more important, because so for example, I'm working with leaders in law firms, where what we're trying to do is to say, your lawyers are going through this huge change, we all are, and we know that those expectations can be damaging for effectiveness, not just for mental health, that's true as well, but for effectiveness. So what we work with them on is saying, let's do two things. Let's spot what we might call sliding door moments, and in those moments, actively choose to turn towards the other person. What I mean by that is, Dr. John Gottman is a psychologist in Washington State, and he coined sliding door moments, not using the film reference, but talking about moments that are relationally significant, and they're really seemingly small moments. It might be when someone sort of says, can we talk about something, or could I have a quick call with you, or just saying, I feel like I've got a lot on and I don't quite know how to deal with this. There are these sorts of moments that aren't just about the details of the work, but are something a bit more about the person and the relationship. That's a sliding door moment. And how we respond in the moment can make our relationships and our trust and our culture go one of two ways. In those moments, we have to choose to turn towards them. And it doesn't mean sort of physically turning towards, it means putting them and their interests above other things like productivity, being particularly and especially on brand, the other stuff that we would value, and that is good, but which needs to take a back seat if we're going to care about trust. So by doing that, by saying, do you know what, actually, I think this was a mistake, how we responded in this ad or whatever it might be, but rather than berating you, rather than shaming you, let's have a conversation about how we could work better, because that implicitly communicates that I understand where you're coming from and I care about that, and making money and supporting the brand and getting things right isn't the only stuff I care about. And I think at the end of the day, trust is about knowing that when you get into a tricky situation, the people that you work with and work for, clients, colleagues, everyone, that they're at the end of the day humans, and they recognize the human stuff as well, and it's not just about making money and getting it right. So that's still fairly high level. I don't know if you want to, we could talk about more sort of practical techniques for doing that, but actually,
I think that would be helpful. I mean, in terms of, because obviously we're talking about like the remote work, and how can we have these kind of sliding door moments when we're not physically together? I don't know if there's anything from your report that you talk about there, anything that you can,
Yeah, definitely. So, and just as a bit of background, for those, I'm sure there's still a few people that haven't read the report, probably most of you, but just to say that the idea with the report is that we noticed, so first of all, to say it's not a coronavirus report, it's a report about virtual working. But the timing was really interesting, and it was spurred on by some of the things that we saw happening around coronavirus and some of what Tomas already identified. But what we noticed was a lot of people in business under stress, and this is no new, surprising discovery. Under stress, we tend to overreact or underreact. So managers who were brilliant, lovely, sort of very human kind of managers in the old days, now under stress and suddenly going to virtual, which maybe felt new and everything to them, and 100% virtual, even if they were working in a more blended way before, for many people, they started becoming sort of micromanagers or completely hands-off, and their behavior was really different. And there was an overreaction, underreaction. And because I'm a philosopher, that made me think of Aristotle, because Aristotle, ancient Greek thinker, his whole approach to ethics was, he said, the way to live well is to try to strike a balance between extremes. So he said virtues, by definition for him, weren't like moral sort of things. They were actually just things that existed in the balance between extremes. So what we did was we went through sort of management, tech, teamwork, well-being, all these sort of main areas of work, and said, where are we seeing overreactions and underreactions? And then what would a balanced sort of virtue in Aristotle's sense be? And we identified things like democracy, accountability, clarity, collegiality, and understanding as those sort of central things that, if we can strike a balance between extremes, are really helpful for businesses all the time, but particularly important in the virtual context. So to come back to your question, I think when we're looking at trust, even though I said I don't think trust itself changes when we go virtual, when we do go virtual, we have to admit that the context has changed. And what's changed is that our communication, our ability to understand each other become more difficult because it's moderated by a screen and everything. And so that's where the virtue of clarity is really important. So in the report, we talk about clarity coming in when we're trying to say, I actually overreact sometimes out of a really good intention. Sometimes I'm like trying to communicate too much to people, or saying that I'm always available for emails or whatever, and then I burn out, right? That's an overreaction. The underreaction is saying, I'm doing deep work and I'm gonna like switch off all notifications all day long and not be contactable. That's an underreaction. But the virtue is clarity, where we say to people, our teams and our colleagues, let me be clear, in the nicest possible sense, from this time to this time, I'm gonna be working on projects. And so I'm gonna be switching everything off. If you really have to contact me, do this, call my mobile or whatever it is. These other times, I'm going to have Slack open, I'm going to have Zoom on and everything else, and I'm there. And that's actually really kind. So it's, Brené Brown, the American social psychology professor, said that clear is kind. And I think that's right. So one of the things we're saying in the report is that through this philosophy of trying to strike the balance, one of the things that's really important for building relationships and specifically trust in the virtual context is being really clear about how we'd like to communicate, about our preferences and our plans for the day, because then people don't have to tiptoe around us. They can just go, oh, right, I know that it's 10 a.m. so Brennan's doing his deep work, so I'm going to try him at 12 or whatever, and it's simple sort of stuff, but it's when it comes to trust.
No, I totally get that. And actually, I mean, I work pretty well, you know, just sort of in terms of my experience, I work pretty well by myself at home when there's no distractions. So, you know, and I do get irritated when I've got too many things kind of like flying at me. And actually, before, when I used to work in an office, what we used to do is to say, well, you know, I'm busy now, so you can't disturb me. And we used to even joke about putting like post-its on our forehead saying "Do not disturb," kind of like during that moment, which
Right.
I thought was quite a, you know, it did work in terms of just having a post-it on your computer rather than on your head. But I think the clarity aspect, I think that makes total sense. And I think just having that tool as a process is actually really helpful. I actually want to kind of see what Ben's opinion of this is. So I'm just going to go and, yeah, Ben, you know, can you just tell us a little bit more about, you know, what you're involved with and what you do at Workplace for Facebook?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. Thanks for having me on as well. Stable internet would be also helpful. I don't know if I'm getting some unstable internet at some point, but I've noticed that certainly during lockdown, internet bandwidth across the board is being hammered. But yeah, thank you. So I work for Workplace from Facebook, and we are essentially a startup within the Facebook business that's focused on a SaaS technology that is a communication tool. So think of it like Facebook at work, but no ads, no games, no brands. You know, confidential information in the form of a news feed, video, all the great things that come with a great platform. And my role there is to coach CEOs and executives on how to show up on these platforms inside and outside your company. So the past few years, I've been working with their internal communication strategy as well as their external when it comes to Facebook or Instagram. And how many of some of the great leaders in the world, whether it's Bill Gates or Richard Branson or Arianna Huffington, Sarah Blakely, these guys run incredible companies or businesses. And so there's a way to help them storytell and to have a framework around how to tell their stories. So yeah, certainly fascinating times. And from a workplace perspective, I think we think about this a bit differently. We think that the audience, when we talk about remote work, there's really kind of two clusters. You know, one is knowledge workers, and those are most likely at a desk or in an office, the physical space that we've referred to on the call. And the other is frontline. And those are people in your retail stores, on your aircraft, in your hospitals. And they're not necessarily reaping the benefits of what we're talking about in regards to remote work, because quite frankly, most of the time they're fully disconnected from headquarters. And it's quite unfortunate when we look at organizations that really want to truly communicate effectively. They need to be able to have the technology and the tools to connect with every single employee, regardless whether you're on the front line, whether you're furloughed or whether you're a knowledge worker. And so I think, firstly, it's about identifying that. The second is thinking about the ingredients that make up what we call a connected company. And further to what Dr. Brennan was talking about, I completely agree. I think celebrating the imperfections is absolutely important and top of mind right now for leadership. Being authentic, you know, vulnerability. There's two types of people. There's people that see vulnerability as a strength and those that see it as a weakness. People that see it as a weakness will be very defensive, and a lot of leaders that we meet with initially are quite reserved about being vulnerable in the form of communicating. I think that's changed quite recently, and last year in the United States, the Business Roundtable, which is a group of 200 CEOs of the biggest companies in the US, got together. And for the first time in history, they announced that their number one priority wasn't driving profits for shareholders. It was employee experience.
Wow.
Putting employees first. And so the ingredients of what makes up a connected company is, firstly, again, Dr. Brennan mentioned that democratizing or democracy is really important. I think when it comes to communication, that we think that's key. So giving everyone a voice in the company, not just leaders or leadership, allowing people to engage in two-way feedback, allowing people from the front lines to share what's going well and really what's not going well. You know, we faced a lot of major problems in the world the last 3 months: diversity and inclusion, racial injustice, pandemic. A lot of these things, even within our own organization, have times become very heated. But you need to be able to give people a voice, and you need to be able to manage that and respect that people have a different opinion on how businesses do things. The other is, yeah.
Sorry. Have you noticed a difference in how people interact now? Like, do you have a...
Yeah, absolutely. I think so connection is one of those, community is another. So one of the things that we focus on inside Facebook and Workplace as well is the sense of belonging and the sense of being part of a community.
Mm-hmm.
So diversity and inclusion is incredibly important here. So organizations having community groups where people can discuss particular issues. We had a pretty fun group during the pandemic lockdown, which was sad working from home meals. And people would take a photo of their sad meal for lunch and they would post it in the group. Our founder and CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, did the same of a steak and a couple of vegetables on the side. It was pretty average from a visual perspective. And people thought, hey, this is amazing. You know, our leader of our business is engaging in this. So people are engaging differently. Video presence is becoming increasingly more important. And video presence is a number of ways that we're thinking about that. So firstly, it isn't just this interaction of video, one-to-one or one-to-few or one-to-many. It's the way or feeling that we get when we join a meeting where we might not be physically in the same room as the group of people that might be in the same room together. So think about if at one point, and we will very soon probably return to a physical environment, if I'm dialing in and there's 8 people around a table, there's still a real disconnection between me in my environment and them in their environment. And so video presence is going to look at ways that we can incorporate that in a more meaningful way. So that's really important. We also like to think about over communication, and that leaders in particular have to be really engaged. Mm-hmm. And so running more all hands or town halls on a more frequent basis is really important, so people feel that they are receiving the relevant information. So yeah, it's both auto sync in terms of what I need to know. It's static information of like the things I need to do my job, mm-hmm. And then ad hoc, I guess, in terms of video presence and those sorts of things.
I mean, in terms of obviously we're all like on videos right now. Zoom is kind of like taking so much of the internet bandwidth that sometimes the internet connection is it. I'm talking to senior leaders who are just basically telling me they're on video calls from like 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. Are you seeing this kind of like a video fatigue, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, firstly, we ran a survey internally at Facebook and we wanted to get a sense of how our employees were thinking about remote work. And more than half of them really felt comfortable working in a remote environment, and just shy of half want to get back to the office as soon as possible. The other aspect was that people were thinking, suggesting that they're working as productive or more productive at home. That's not necessarily a positive thing potentially with well-being, because working longer hours, you're juggling parent schedules, or you're juggling other things in your life that you may not encounter when you're in a physical space. So I think that definitely people are seeing a bit of pressure on their work-life balance, which is stressful. And I think well-being is a huge part of this journey as well. And practicing mindfulness, or just taking time out of the day to think, or just to have a break is important. To walk around the block. I know in the first few weeks you would be, as you said, like at the dining table or at the desk for 8 hours straight and not get an opportunity to even go outside. So I think it is putting pressure, but it is defining, I think, what work-life balance means. I think there is a new definition for that now, and people are starting to get a bit more comfortable with it than they were in the beginning.
Actually, on that, because Thomas was talking about that earlier. I mean, Thomas, what in terms of work-life balance, and how any kind of suggestions or anything that you're implementing, having people kind of working from home and everything's kind of like this big blend of things.
A couple of comments on that. The first one is the tremendous, richness of different situations. I mean, we are definitely not equal and the same when it comes to home working. And I think we need first to respect that. In a given team of, say, 6 people who would have 6 different attitudes towards. One was eager to come back to the office. The other one discovered that 1 hour drive every day was, et cetera, et cetera. That's the first point. The second point is that definitely there's a very specific, I'm not a psychologist or scientific, but I would use the word home working burnout, and really a very real danger in the past that was compounded by especially for people who had kids at home. It was really difficult to be locked down in a flat with kids, or even a house was really difficult. It's going to be less the case in the future, but we are working on finding ways like a charter, joint commitment to set boundaries. I mean, it's exactly what Bernard said about clarity. And really, I think it's very important to be off to settings that on daily hours coming weeks or months.
I was talking to a McKinsey partner the other day, and they were talking about how actually, although, they have like a very, very strong kind of like, long hours and working culture, but actually they do implement boundaries, and that works really well when it comes to families. And, but yeah, I mean, other kind of, tips that you can have, for how C-suite leaders can kind of empower their employees when working remotely.
Well, to show example, for instance, our CEO has continued to work from home after the end of the lockdown. So it's like giving permission to do it, and more than that. So that was, and even he's doing it from second home. So it's really widely opening the permission, and then it's really having a lot more about the common goals. I would not say the objective, because it's not only management by results, which would be one of the wrong way, I think, of thinking about delegation and trust. But there's something like that. I mean, it's not the way you do it or the number. It's really what's happening at the end. And if leaders really look at is it solving the problems? Is it contributing to the team, et cetera, and not how did you get to the point? How many hours, basically? No one even asked the question, but it's an implicit question. Is how many hours did you really sweat to get to this presentation? We should not care at all now.
No, that's a very good point. Thank you for that. I'd like to open up to our audience, but I have a very short poll while everyone thinks of a question. Otherwise, I might just pick some questions that we had earlier. So I'm just going to launch a poll, and this is for our attendees to get involved a little bit. So actually, so I've just started. So I'll just let it like run for a minute. So you should have a screen on your computer just asking questions like, have you enjoyed working virtually recently? How has been your productivity? Could a virtual office ever replace a physical office? And is your company considering more virtual working in the future? So so if our attendees can start. Oh, here we go. And I think there are 6 questions in total. And then I'm going to bring up, whilst that kind of is running, I'll bring up some of the questions that we had. I have lots myself, so, but I really would like for people to get involved. I know some people said that they're happy to be visible, so maybe I can even pick on them. So let's just see who's in the audience, because I haven't had the chance to see yet. So maybe I'll pick on Patrick, but I'll come back to it. So yes, so we've got, oh, that's interesting. So we've got, I'll give you what the results are now. So most people, 82% enjoyed working from, well, virtually, we said. Productivity has been 50% higher and more or less the same, 44%. Could a virtual office ever replace a physical office? Yes, 30%, 33% no, 37% not sure. So it's very much divided. Is your company considering more virtual working in the future? 75% said yes. Do you think leaders need different skills to manage remote teams? 95% say yes. That's really interesting. And then the last question is, do you want to go back into the office? And 43% say yes, 5% say no, and it depends, 52%. So I'll share these with you afterwards, but I thought that was really interesting insights. So yes, and I didn't bring up the questions that I had, so let's just give you a second. So we had a question from Shivani Ladwa, who is the HR manager at Ralph & Russo, but I'm not sure if she is here. I can't see her. So, and her question was to Thomas, and the question is, what's the most effective way of managing employees? Oh, what have I done? Hold on. Employee engagement and motivation during a pandemic. And how much transparency is acceptable in terms of sharing information on the current state of the business? So Thomas, this is a question for you.
Most effective way, I don't know, but what we've done is we really had a common purpose, and we celebrated a lot the wins. The way we managed to keep the center open with full safety, I would say, was celebrated across Europe. We had a message from teams in boutiques from Islington to Vienna, etc., short videos, etc. Same when we started to produce masks. The first boutique to reopen was in Salzburg. So the same DC center that has been thanked by the team because they were managing to stay open did a big merci. So thank you, but physical one to the Salzburg boutique. It was very moving. It was a lot of emotion at one point. And the frequency of communication increased. We opened a lot of different channels of communication. We even opened a Petit Bateau family page on Facebook. So we didn't manage to have the most sophisticated tools, but we decided to open a schedule that was very clearly reserved to speak about our private life, our personal life. So it was only picture of kids and gardens, and because our mission is to reconnect people to nature, etc., etc. And then for transparency, I will finish on that. Full transparency. I mean, the more info you share, there's absolutely no doubt. In a crisis situation, there's nothing should be put under the carpet.
And maybe I can pick somebody from the audience. I've got Patrick here. Can I bring you in, Patrick? I'm going to make you a panelist, and then you can tell us if you don't want to be there, and otherwise I'll just pick another question. So I'm just bringing him on board. And then Kobe, maybe I can ask your opinion as well. Patrick, are you okay to be here? I think, hold on. Oh, hello, Patrick.
There we go.
Sorry to just pick on you like that, but you did say yes to being visible, so there you are. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Patrick Henshaw. I'm in charge of human resources for Skechers USA for Europe, based in Paris.
And we have been former colleagues without knowing each other, by the way.
No, I know. We've missed each other, but we always, it's a close world. So I followed you around, Thomas.
And Patrick, what are your thoughts on remote working, and how is your business kind of adjusting, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it's still a learning process. I think culturally, I am working for an American company, and I would have thought that these guys, would from the very beginning have been more culturally open to this. But this is new, even for us. This is very new. So I think we've had the opportunity to launch this quite quickly. We've had the opportunity to formalize it quite quickly. We did actually a specific charter for remote working that basically serves the purpose of being a test, because we don't know what this will look like. You said this at the beginning, in the next 6 months. So basically we agreed to try it for now and set the path for later on, so we can learn from the context. I see a lot of situations which do need some discussion and opening about. For example, I have the feeling that a lot of managers are discovering a new way to manage. Some are following their teams too closely, calling them every 5 minutes. Some are keeping. Also from an employee perspective, a team perspective, I see some people who are connected all the time. I see some people who are a little bit like, remember when the first BlackBerries arrived, you know, everyone was just desperate to have one, and then everyone realized that it wasn't actually such a gift. And it's a little bit that same situation I'm encountering, and I do see that some people are finding it difficult to adjust. I think it's a learning process, and I do count on the next, you know, until the end of the year, the next 4 or 5 months to sort of find all the takeaways from this situation and maybe adjust into the new year towards maybe something like, you know, bringing some consistency to this across the different countries, and maybe leading towards maybe 1 day a week remote working. Because for different reasons. One is, you said it as well, people are looking for this. This is like a recruitment tool as well. A lot of candidates are asking now companies if this is the type of working environment we provide. But also, this situation is not over, and we don't know if in 6 months, 1 year from now, there's going to be a second stage, a third stage. So we need to be ready in any case to fall back into this mode. So different situations, really.
Mm. Well, thank you for that, Patrick. Do you have any questions for any of the panelists?
No, I think it's good to see different perspectives. I think from a strategic and operational perspective, and you guys have shared on all aspects. I think it's really one of those topics where understanding and learning from best practices as well, because this is fairly new for me anyway. So I'm really open to reading, and you mentioned a couple of exercises on this, and to understand further, because I don't think we have the, you know, we don't have the key to everything. We're still testing, and I'm just wanting to learn more. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and ideas.
Thank you. Actually, there's a question for you, Patrick. Oh, sorry, Brandon, you wanted, we'll come back to this question.
Just a very quick response to what Patrick just shared. I think it makes me think, one of the things that I've been noticing throughout this period is we can talk about sort of technique and practical application, you know, how many days in and out of the office and things. And I think that's really the right conversation to be having. But also going back to the culture point, the mindset that we bring to all of this really matters, because like you said about, you might think that one particular market or culture, whatever, might be more open to some of this flexibility. But actually, unless we have, you know, so I'm a big fan of, say, growth mindset, for example, and the ability to believe that we can change and develop our abilities. And I think unless we have that openness to change and recognizing all the things we've been saying throughout the session, that, you know, we don't have to be perfect. Unless we have that, we could have all the latest tech, all the different sort of policies and things, but people are just going to find them stressful instead of sort of enabling and empowering. So I think there's a piece around sort of mindset development maybe as well, just to layer on top.
Thank you. We'll go Kelsey. I'm going to bring Kelsey onto the panel, and so she can ask the question. Actually, Patrick, this one's for you. So Kelsey, I'm just bringing you as a panelist. So just please introduce yourself and what your question is, if you're okay with that.
Of course, absolutely. Sorry, it just cut off for one moment whilst I was connecting. Would you like me to turn my video on?
Yes, you should be able to do that.
Yes.
Here you are.
Hi. My question was directed to you, Patrick, but I'd be more than interested in hearing anyone else's perspective. And I actually jumped on just recently because I had a meeting, so apologies for being late. My question was, how best can managers support the growth and learning opportunities for junior team members when working from home? Because obviously a lot of what's gone on recently is a lot of, you know, putting out fires, and sometimes with that, the learning curve and new growth opportunities is compromised. And I mean this obviously in the instance of people who are asking to learn more, who are eager to learn more, just how you would recommend managers handle that when they're not having direct contact with their teams.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'll be the best person to answer this, but you're actually making me think about a situation we're encountering right now, which is not answering your question directly, but beyond even training and people who are maybe more junior or new in their position, I'm also thinking about people who are just joining the business at this very time. This is quite a context. I've had just two in the French affiliate new joiners, And to start in this context, when everyone is working remotely, I mean, how do you get people onboarded? So training, onboarding, and I guess this is where the manager has to play the biggest role, because who else is actually going to bring that level of coaching, proximity, understanding what the objectives are, what is expected from your role, and how you are going to be able to achieve these different expectations if actually you're by yourself and talking to yourself and you don't have an interaction with anyone. So that's a huge topic, and I'm sure, Maria, there's enough material there for about 3 new sessions on this one.
There always is, and we always overrun, because that's when about an hour after, that's when conversation gets really interesting, and that's when everyone has to go back and doing what they need to do. But actually, I wanted to bring Ben. Ben, what are your thoughts on this? Because you must be seeing a lot of that, actually.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen growth even in the business in the last sort of few months, because we've had to hire more people to come and manage bigger problems in lots of ways. So from a younger generation perspective, I think my perspective on it is, my personal view is, the expectation of employees today, and say the younger generation, myself included, is that the tools that they should use at work should be as easy to use as the tools they use in their personal life. And so, on your phone, there's probably somewhere between 11 to 15 apps that you would use for work, whether that's, shadow IT or not. But we want to be able to really be inclusive and to really start to use video tools, chat tools. Workplace is a great example. I think, Kelsey, further to your question, this really comes back to my main point, which is around giving everyone a voice. There's so many incredible ideas that we've had from people in all corners of the world that have been able to troubleshoot and solve for ideas, whether they be small or whether they be large, where we're giving them the ability to do this in their own environment where they can add value to the business. And that really adds to the culture of who we are, and going back to kind of open and transparency and being an open company. But I think that's a fantastic opportunity for anyone, not just younger generation, but for anyone to ideate and to really create ideas in that kind of community and connection aspect. And that helps companies thrive, I think. And digital transformation is being accelerated now purely because of the fact that we're kind of dealt with these cards. But I think there's so many positives out of it as well.
Thank you, Ben. I was going to say we can have one more question, but I think I'm going to close it with one question for all of the panelists. And Kelsey, thank you. And Patrick, thank you so much for participating. And my question, I mean, we talked a lot about, Tomo, I think you started as like, why should I come to the office today? Like, just in 3 words for each of you, what is the purpose of the office now? So Tomo, let's go with you first.
Yeah, meeting human beings.
That's good. That's great. And Brennan, in 3 words.
Forging new relationships.
Amazing.
The word new is important, and to come back to sorry, Maria, but there's a danger of fragmented work, or to be very conservative, actually, because it works well when we know each other. So this openness to new things, new people, new ideas is very important to keep up.
And Ben, in 3 words, what's the purpose of the office?
Power of connection.
Amazing. That's excellent. So we're 1 minute, and I'm going to keep it really short, but I could talk about this for hours. I say this each time, but I really want to be really, really careful with time. I know everyone's, time is extremely precious. And I do thank everyone for participating, for sending your questions through, and, for our great panelists to share their thoughts and ideas. For me, it's like the purpose of the office is, absolutely is that community. It's sharing of ideas and actually working towards a common purpose. And I think as a result of the pandemic, we all have been facing this. It's like, why do we do what we do? It doesn't matter how we do it, whether if we're at home or in the office, but why do you show up? What does it mean to you? And I think, that this can only be a positive thing. And I think going back to what we were talking about earlier about, I really hope that this kind of stays. And, Thomas was saying, it's like, oh, I wish it was like a little bit longer, that you have time to kind of, consolidate all of these ideas, and for it not to kind of go back to the old way, because the old way in some ways wasn't really working. And, how can we better it? How can we go into the future with something more, more efficient, more interesting, more engaging, more purposeful, and I really wish that, you know, all of us as a collective really make that happen. So thank you again for being here, and enjoy your Fridays. And we're just 2 minutes past 3, so we're doing really well.
Thank you, Maria.
You know, see you when we can and catch up individually, and we'll share this recording afterwards. And you know, if you have any questions, then let me know. So thank you so much. And
thank you, Maria. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.